Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Riparian Restoration and the Benefits of Beavers. I'm Ashley Chesser with Wild Farm Alliance, and I'm happy to have you with us today. Let's start by having folks enter your name and if you're affiliated with an organization or a farm, and then where you're located in the chat. It's kind of fun to see where people are coming from as we get going here. And then while you're doing that, I'm going to share just a few quick things about Wild Farm Alliance, and then we'll jump into our speakers. Since the year 2000, we've been working with farmers to achieve healthy, viable agriculture that protects and restores wild nature. And we have a 2050 vision in our three program areas where we aim to see 1 million nest boxes and perches on farms in our Farmland Flyways program, hedgerows of habitat, the length of the moon and back, which is about 500,000 miles in our Farmland Wildways program, and then 10% of river frontage on farms planted as farmland waterways, leading to about 100,000 miles of riverine habitat. And this is the program area we're talking about today. So we're excited to talk about farmland waterways. Let's see. And then just a couple other resources. We have a series called Connecting with Wild Neighbors. And this is basically a series to help farmers coexist with species that can sometimes cause them headaches, but are important to the ecosystem health of the region. And so we have a beavers issue. You can find that at wildfarmalliance.org/beavers. And then we're excited about this soil health and habitat field series that we've got coming up over the summer. We've got 4 field days in the Northwest and Northern California. And so we encourage you, if you live near any of these areas, to come join us for a field day. We're excited to partner with Salmon Safe on this project, as well as our webinar today. And so you can learn more information about the events and the speakers at these field days at wildfarmalliance.org/events. Today's webinar does have 1.5 continuing education credits through the American Society of Agronomy, so certified crop advisors or others that need CCA credits through them. Stay on at the end of the call for our evaluation and to make sure to enter your name and your license number there if you want to get credits. But let's jump into today's webinar. We've got 3 speakers today. We've got Brian Muegge, Farm Program Manager with Salmon Safe, is going to be talking about their water quality work and their certification program. Ben Larson from Farmhands Cooperative is going to be talking about some riparian projects on their farm. I'm excited to have Ben join us because I was lucky enough to visit their farm a few times and see some of the habitat restoration that they're doing in person. And so excited to have him share that with you all. And then Angie Thompson is going to be sharing her beaver research through Oregon State University. She's going to make you fall in love with beavers. I am going to stop sharing and we're going to pass it over to Brian to kick us off.
Can everyone see this okay?
Yeah, looks good.
Great. Well, thanks again for that intro. Great to see some great geographic diversity of folks in the chat. So thank you for sharing that. I wanted to kick us off. I'm Salmon Safe's Farm Program Manager. So I'm based here in Spokane, Washington. Our organization's based in Portland, and we've been at this work for nearly 30 years, so we're excited to continue to implement and expand our work across the Columbia Basin. And thank you for Wild Farm Alliance to have us on. So a quick rundown of what I'll be sharing today is a little bit of history about our program, how we specifically interact within riparian and landscape level conservation on working lands, how our certification works, and then what sort of partnership implementation that we do to achieve our work. Oh my goodness, why did it not like that? Hang on. It's not letting me scroll. Hold on. Why are you doing that? Sorry. There it is. Okay, sorry about that. This is the Rogue River of Oregon. This is where our program began. So Salmon Safe in the late 90s spun off from another nonprofit called Pacific Rivers. And during that time, There was quite a bit of discussion and admittedly a bit of contention around private land conservation as related to species such as fish, but also the northern spotted owl. And so our current executive director and co-founder Dan Kent, along with another couple co-founders, wanted to create a program looking specifically at working lands and how there could be further incentives on working lands from a voluntary conservation perspective to improve, of course, things like riparian areas, in-stream habitat, et cetera. And so that's really where our program began. And at the same time, the organic program as a certification was becoming nationalized. And so essentially, our goal as we spun off from Pacific Rivers was to create certification framework based upon the needs of Pacific salmon that landowners could implement and adopt practices, and we would then certify their practices as salmon safe. So um, this is generally speaking where we work across the West Coast. I mean, you'll find salmon and other salmonids all the way from the North Pacific, all the way through the Aleutians in Russia, all the way down past LA into Mexico. There's trout species. So really, when we talk about salmon safe, we're talking about promoting clean, cold, and abundant water across Salmon Nation. And so these are really our focus areas: the Puget Sound, Western Oregon, where we got our start, and then of course now the interior Columbia Basin, and to a lesser extent Northern California and Alaska, and then British Columbia as well. So as I mentioned, we started off our program working with expert independent assessors to create a framework that we could then assess landowners on from a best management practice perspective. We began with our first crop sector was wine grapes, working in the Rogue River Valley and then into the Willamette Valley. And then we figured out very quickly that other entities within the watershed could benefit from a similar level of best management practice incentivization. And so we then began to develop our frameworks to also account for the built environment. So this is essentially the current iteration of all of our different farm standards that are all keying upon the same core criteria. We just apply them in different facets of the watershed. So, and those all essentially tie into, as I mentioned, cold, clean, and abundant water for salmon. So, how do we achieve that? So, a lot of the practices within these standards are focused on in-stream habitat protection, of course, riparian and wetland area protection, erosion management, water use and efficiency, and integrated pest management, of course. So, what inputs are being used that are harmful or less harmful for aquatic life? Biodiversity, conservation, and climate resiliency, which kind of ties all those together. I really like to show this slide, which shows like essentially the what happens when you begin to implement these practices on working lands, particularly farms, and how they can really strengthen you as a landowner and a farmer or producer for what will unfortunately be a bit of a rocky road ahead with what we know about climate change impacts. So. Um, yeah, I enjoy that slide. How we begin to work with landowners, we will reach out to them or they reach out to us or work through a network of implementation partners that we have. And then we will have the farmer prepare baseline information, so farm maps, spray records, other pertinent bits of information on the farm, and then we will have our expert third-party independent assessor who we contract with. We have several, and we will have them do an on-site farm evaluation, and they will render a decision rule for certification. And that would include whether or not there are things that need to be improved upon. This is a good example. The photo on the top is one of our farm assessors, Jude Hobbs, in the Willamette Valley farm on an assessment. And then below is an assessment that we did in the built environment with a team. Our urban assessments look a little bit different. There's multiple assessors depending on the size and scope of the project, but this was on Lake Arthur, which is on Gonzaga University's campus in Spokane, and we're trying to figure out, or the assessors were trying to figure out the outflow and impact. So and then once we render the decision, ta-da, we will have a farm be salmon safe certified if they sign on and agree to what those conditions may be, if there are any present. And that would essentially look like, well, I'll pop over actually to this slide. which is pertinent to riparian health. So, as an example, a farm under assessment, we would find that there needs to be improved habitat of a riparian area. And so essentially what we would then do is we would create a conditional certification. So that grower would say, or we would say to that grower, you went through the assessment, that's great. Our third party independent assessor found that the riparian area needs to be improved upon. So then we would have that be as a condition. The farmer would sign that form, and then throughout the 3-year certification cycle, we would check in on what those conditions may be. And as an example, with this farm in the Willamette Valley, they had a condition around riparian plantings, and with our program, they were able to figure out where that was on the farm that was needed, and then work with their local soil and water conservation district and watershed council to get funding and technical support. So, and there's other projects that we've done in a similar incentive process through conditions. There's a rain garden at Griffin Creek, and that's adjacent to a salmon-bearing waterway on farm. And so this has been a great way of similarly incentivizing that watershed conservation. And then this is another farm here on the right where we similarly have quite a bit of content within our standards that have farmers that incentivize farmers to adopt cover cropping and soil health practices that, of course, reduce erosion and improve water quality. So here's just an example of our farm standards as well. We actually address riparian and wetland uh, impacts in both our in-stream section and, of course, our riparian this section. And so this is what we would be, the third-party independent assessor would be referring to as they're working with farms. So getting a sense of the condition, if there are riparian areas present, the condition, the buffers, plant composition, et cetera. So yeah, just to run through the rest of this, just to like round out our full program. So as we're boots on the ground incentivizing farmers to adopt these practices, we're also working very heavily within the supply chain. So trying to drive value for farmers to continue to show that voluntary conservation action has not just on-farm benefits, but also market benefits. And so we constantly are working with retailers to explore price premiums, um, and market access. So working with not just retailers, but buyers as well for salmon safe certified products. And then again, on the farm side, there are benefits, like I mentioned, really adopting these practices from a climate resiliency perspective. And a lot of farmers really enjoy the on-site farm evaluation. They find that to be a really valuable technical presentation. So here's just some examples of work we've done in the market. This is one with a grain grower with some whiskey. Here's one of our hop farms who worked with a brewery, and so they were able to bring that label through to the can. We have sourcing thresholds similar to the organic program as to how much you can source in order to carry the label. Here's some more work with grain. One of our longer age campaigns with Willamette Valley Vineyards, one of our original vineyards. Some work with PCC Community Markets here in Washington. So that's our retail side, and just really briefly how we're funded. We have a mix of private foundational funding, but also state and federal agency funding, and we have been funded through EPA Region 10 Columbia Basin Toxics Reduction Program to implement our work. In 2023, we got our second larger grant to really focus in on east of the Cascades and working with yeah, folks that are orchardists, hop growers, dryland wheat, and other crops. And so this is just a photo of a delegation that we took last year, and with EPA staff and farmers. And really, I like this photo because it shows that, yeah, we can collaborate and fund the right things for ag viability. We also have a trout safe program. It's our same farm program. It's just one that we've been developing with our partners in the Upper Columbia Basin where trout are historic or where salmon are historically not present. And that was with Henry's Fork Foundation, the Nature Conservancy, and Friends of the Teton River. So farmers in some of those upper reaches, if they become salmon safe certified, same farm standards that they're being assessed on, but they can market themselves as trout safe. TNC was a partner in getting some of this first trout safe acreage involved. And I'll leave you with just some other work that we're doing in the Columbia Basin. We've partnered recently with the Coeur d'Alene tribe here in the interior Columbia Basin there in Idaho to pilot some perennial grains to really figure out how perennial grains are benefiting soil from a carbon perspective, and then also some Palouse prairie restoration as well. So it's a really exciting project to be a part of. And that is all from me. So,
Thanks, Brian. So if you are a farmer or if you work with farmers who are interested, can they reach out to you, Brian? Would
yeah,
that be?
absolutely. Yeah, I can share my information afterwards. Yep.
Yeah, sounds great. All right. We're going to pass it over now to Ben to talk about Farmhands Cooperative in Cresswell, Oregon, and the work that they're doing to revitalize their riparian areas.
All right, thank you. So yeah, my name's Ben and I've been involved in farming for 13 years and about four years into it, we had the opportunity to restore this area of the farm that was in a grass seed field. And that kind of launched the rest of the farm restoration project. So the whole farm is 320 acres. Largely, it is in pasture and orchards, and about 100 acres of riparian forest. So here's the coast fork of the Willamette River. And along the backside of this field, you could follow Bear Creek, which kind of flows along the south side of the property and then kind of through the middle of the property. Um, and so, yeah, in 2017, we started working with the Coast Fork Willamette Watershed Council. And they kind of led this project for us with a little bit of, front end planning on our side, but they were the project manager to install these plantings on this cut bank of of the river. So this was previously in grass seed, farmed like all the way up to the riverbank there, and uh, it seemed like almost every year we'd lose a few feet of bank, sometimes a few dozen feet of bank, just because it is, you can see in a pretty strong bend of the river there. And so we were excited to get some perennial roots in the ground to kind of stabilize that. And yeah, it was in in partnership with them. They applied for an OWEB grant, and we also worked with the Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS, to install these fences to, fence out the livestock, and put in some water troughs for them since they wouldn't be drinking out of the river. Um, but yeah, so this was nine years ago. These plantings were put in. There was weed treatments throughout those first few years. Even some like weed whacking a few years ago for some like really big teasel to kind of remove from some of the plants that were not quite yet free to grow. And yeah, then they started coming up. So that was then. This is now. So you can see that they've come up really well. It's just like awesome to walk out there now. Just total transformation from a barren field that was plowed every year to offering shade along the river and stabilizing the bank and just providing a lot of habitat for wildlife and other other benefits as well. So this is kind of like on the left there, a roadway that underneath there is like the pipeline that was installed for the water troughs, and just a few more pictures of kind of what all is out there. And then here you can see along the bank where stuff's growing. A lot of nice habitat, native plants, and yeah, it's just been really fun to walk out there and convene with nature a bit more. And yeah, seeing kind of the benefits of the stabilization of the bank and what sort of uh, other things we can see out there. And yeah, it's been great. So that was like the first project for restoration on the property. Um, this is kind of the easiest spot to point to because it was like a grass field that was, very barren. But the whole first phase of that project also included like more mature riparian forests that were dominated in the mid-story by Armenian blackberry. And so we had all of that removed as well. So you can kind of see some of the effects here of what that what that looked like and some of the changes. Um, but yeah, so that was the first activity, was like kind of restoring most of the river. The part that was in like field production is enrolled in CREP, which is a USDA project. So that has a little rental payment every year for what's removed from like field activities. Um, but the whole farm being 320 acres, we weren't able to restore all of the riparian forest that first year. And so it came in a few phases. And this here on the left was actually a phase 3 project where we did that same like understory removal of blackberry, but there was also some top story management. So here you can see a lot of really big oak trees. And so this was part of a oak release project. So we cleared out some like ash and maple that were crowding them out to help them kind of reach their full potential, while also, eliminating the understory, mid-story of blackberry so that we could, have that next generation starting to come through to replace these big oak trees someday. Um, so all in all, we have had the ability to plant about 100,000 native trees and shrubs from 100 different species, and restoring like over 100 acres of riparian forests, some of that being like expansions, as we saw in that first slide, a lot of it being just improvements of existing riparian forests. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of what we've been able to do out there. You can see some of the like edge improvements, so a lot of like just small expansion. So on the left here was just like a removal of blackberries. On the right was like an expansion of a forest edge to just be a little bit bigger. This was already a pretty nice riparian area, but it was a big grassy field to the right of that. And so just closing that in a little bit to increase the amount of diverse habitat. And I did forget to mention most of the tree species on the farm um, are not coniferous, and so this was a cool project to add a lot more diversity to what sort of things are growing out here and gonna continue to dominate the landscape. So this is the maple forest right along the river that this was kind of the most iconic part of I forgot to mention I grew up out here, and so this was like on the walk down to the river swimming hole. This is kind of the most iconic part of the farm to me growing up because as you can see it's very beautiful, lots of big trees, lots of understory, but this was very dominated with blackberry. You couldn't get off of the road, and I'm just gonna play a little video of what I saw up there. So I guess primarily what I heard, but a lot of bird diversity out there. That was just the other day. You could see some blue lines kind of running from the maple trees. Those are big leaf maple tapping that we're doing some smaller scale experimentation with. Maybe medium scale is the right term for this area at least, since it's a much more popular thing to do on with sugar maple out east, but there is a pretty big effort in the Northwest to explore the viability and market potential of big leaf maple sap products. And we've had the opportunity to kind of work with some of that initial research and are continuing to explore that with some local partners. So that's just been a fun project that wouldn't be possible without this funding we got to remove the blackberry because it's already enough work to cut trails through, you know, snowberry and all the other little understory plants that aren't 10 feet tall and attacking you. And so, yeah, just thought that was a cool thing to mention that has been a very direct benefit of these projects for our farming operation. Another one of those benefits has been the pasture improvements that have been largely through the NRCS funding, the EQIP program, but in partnership certainly with the riparian restoration activities. So on the right here, you can see that initial field that I was showing that was barren is now has 20-foot tall native plants growing in it. This whole fence line was funded through that NRCS program as well as the water troughs out there. And so it just kind of help jumpstart the ability to like do these projects because otherwise we would have been really lacking funding to grow the ranching operation. And yeah, it's just been really, really great to be able to, grow from, beginning farmers that weren't doing any land management to installing this fence just a few years into our operation, significantly expanding how much acreage we had to be grazed. And yeah, we can also see like on the left here, we've got a pasture that, has some silvo pasture, I guess you would say, right? It's got a lot of trees growing in it. So a lot of the trees we fenced out because they were in the riparian areas because they were, not farmable for the previous grass seed farming operation, being in such wet areas. But there were other areas of forest that were remaining in not stream locations, and so this was one that we got to include in the pasture. So they're of great benefit for shade and scratching posts and all sorts of other habitat benefits. Um, and then the other side of things, we um, do a lot of orchard management. So we've got between 25 and 30 acres of orchards on the property, mostly hazelnuts and quite a few cider apples as well. And one of our primary activities is mowing because we grow a lot of cover crops out there. So cover crops help cycle the nutrients for us. They certainly reduce erosion, but pretty minor being on such flat land as we are in the floodplain. But a lot of habitat benefits for beneficials. We have the ability to kind of reduce how much chemicals we are using. We've been growing with organic practices, and that wouldn't be possible without the use of cover crops. And we have just kind of we've planted a little bit of clover, but mostly it's just volunteer stuff out there that we've kind of let grow up and take over. And yeah, now is the season for starting to mow that back and get it to break down before harvest season. Since hazelnuts are ground harvested, it's important that we have as little material remaining by the end of September as possible. So um, yeah, more of a complementary activity to a lot of the restoration that's been going on. But just wanted to kind of showcase what our orchards look like this time of year. Um, and then on the left here, I've got some pigs, and this is more out post harvest. So they're cleaning up the extra fallen nuts, and primary reason is to get the little worms called filbert worms that are living in there. Um, they will crawl out of a little hole that they maintain in the hazelnuts and burrow into the soil for the winter, and so well, and then hatch out into moths and mate in the spring and summer. And so if we can do anything to disrupt their life cycle, we try and do that so that we don't have to spray insecticides. And you can imagine that it is pretty effective. We've been able to work on some research with the University of Oregon, and it showed a pretty high amount of impact on those filbert worm populations, as well as in the neighboring oaks, which are also the native host to the filbert worm. So we have oak trees, we have hazelnut trees, both of them, can harbor that primary pest of hazelnuts. And so um, moving the pigs out of the wet areas when it starts to rain at the end of October and into orchard setting has been, a mutually beneficial for habitat, not like causing more erosion in those riparian forests, but also reducing how much pest pressure we have in the orchards. And yeah, that was actually how I met Ashley originally, was through the Northwest Center for Alternatives to Pesticides. They produced a video kind of highlighting that practice of using pigs to control filbert worms, since that's one of the biggest reasons that growers are very hesitant to adopt organic practices, is because of the filbert worm and how to manage it. So we produced that video to help educate other growers on alternatives to pesticides. And yeah, on top of insecticide use, we talked about like herbicide use here, kind of using cover crops to um, mitigate how much we're needing to use pesticides, because we are trying to grow lots of cover crop to cycle those nutrients, to sequester nitrogen, to feed the rhizobia, or sorry, feed, well, rhizobia and mycorrhizal networks to help the trees get access to the nutrients that they need. And so, yeah, those kind of the orchard highlights. Um, and then on the this is just like a drone video of kind of a different side of the property that you can see has pretty mature forest, and then a little further back is a later planting of a crep project. So that one's like 3 or 4 years younger, right in here. And so just wanted to kind of show that, there's a lot of habitat being available throughout the area, but also like a lot of, deforestation as you get further into town. So we're really at the close to the edge of the valley, and it gets a lot more mountainous as you go south, and therefore there's a lot more agricultural activity as you head north. And then I just wanted to highlight on the right here, kind of showing like what this property looks like in a flood stage. So being in the floodplain, this is, uh, you can see this was like pasture that was not underwater, and actually the high point of all of our pastures. And it in the last major flood event was underwater, and that's just kind of part of what we have to deal with living in the floodplain. And so that's just been that much more important for us to think about. Okay, well, we don't want to apply a bunch of pesticides that are going to wash away when the rain comes up, and we don't want a lot of erosion from um, other ground disturbing or pesticide applications, that is going to, impact water quality downstream in these flood events in particular. And so that's been, part of the inspiration, and part of, why these funding sources were available to us, is because of, where we are, and kind of those fluctuations that we're prone to having. And then the last picture here, I just on my way of taking all of these pictures the other day. This was on the middle of the road, a deer carcass. They are, probably definitely the biggest pest for our apple operation. They love apples despite how many deer fences we build, and just kind of showing like, this is, maybe we do have more deer habitat now with all the restoration activities, but we certainly have more predator habitat too. Something was feeling confident enough to drag a deer into the road, um, where, we don't travel that often, but it is on the way to the river spot and maple tapping operation, and just think it's cool to see that, there's a lot of other critters living out here that don't necessarily show their faces as much, but we get to see their impacts. So that's what I've got for you.
Thank you, Ben. It was fun to see all the different species. I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll. Basically, we want to see if you guys were paying attention. And then while you're taking the poll questions, we do have a few questions in the chat. And if you have any more for Ben, please feel free to put them in there and we'll maybe cover a few now and then the rest at the end. But one question for you, what steps do you take to remove blackberry? You talked about kind of getting rid of that and installing some native species, but what are the steps involved for doing that project?
Yeah, I kind of neglected to talk very much about that. So we because we weren't the project manager, it was easy to kind of be like, wow, this is all happening around us, and we didn't have to do a whole lot besides, help with the application. But there was a lot of initial work with a, local contractor, Rosario, that came through with like chainsaws and this big like masticator machine that would like basically mow down all the blackberries in blackberry sections, and then chainsaws were more like throughout the more diverse habitats that weren't dominated by blackberry entirely. And then like 2 to 3 herbicide applications like the year following as they were starting to regrow that were very targeted. And that was kind of it. There was some like underseeding after that. And then yeah, kind of maybe like one more herbicide application after that seeding that was again very targeted towards just where the blackberries regrowing. But
All right. And then I had a question. What's your favorite native species that you've planted, or if you want to just highlight a few? I could see Oregon grape in there and maybe Oso berry. But I don't know if you have any of that you want to mention specifically.
yeah, I think elderberry is just like really beautiful, and uh, I love how it gets so tall and bushy and changes from white to the berries being much darker throughout the year. So that one's definitely a favorite. Um, and I just love how like effectively willows grow and how big they can get so quickly. And we actually harvested a bunch, and I now live more urban environment, and we built a little willow fence to keep my dog out of the garden, and so they're just very versatile and hardy, and yeah,
Cool.
go with those two.
All right. I think Angie's going to talk about willows in a minute here as well. All right. Let's talk about the poll questions. If you can you read these and then let us know how people did?
Okay, so how do we promote water quality? Yeah, all of the above. So yeah, a lot of expansions of riparian buffers as well as like quality improvements. And then, yeah, it's not just, the habitat areas that are promoting water quality. It's also the agricultural areas. So having cover crops out there, and, not using a bunch of pesticides that are going to seriously harm the environment. So great job, class. And then who've been the most important partnerships for their ability to work at improving water quality? Yeah, it's the third one here. So uh yeah, the Coast Fork Willamette Watershed Council was kind of the primary lead to they're the only ones that could apply for like an OWEB grant, so that was critical for especially this last phase that finished finished the restoration activities. And then obviously NRCS was really big for that as well. And then yeah, the local contractor that actually did all of the, restoration activities.
All right, everyone did well. I'm going to pass it over to Angie. I think her setup takes just a minute to get configured. So if anyone else has any questions for Ben or for Brian earlier while we're getting that set up, Dee Dee wants to know now that the project is wrapped up, what was the overall cost for a project like this? Do you have any idea?
Um, if you include like all of the fencing infrastructure and like different like livestock stuff on top of the restoration activities, it was just just under like 500,000.
Hmm.
So that was for a little like 120 acres of uh restoration activities on top of like the infrastructure. And I'm also including some like other NRCS funding for like a little bit of orchard stuff in there, as well as some like a corral restructuring. And so a little less than that overall for the just if I was to take a guess, I'd probably around 300,000 for the just the restoration activities, maybe two.
So important to find funding for projects like that.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yep.
All right. How are we doing, Angie?
I am ready to go when you are.
All right, take it away.
All right. Well, good afternoon. My name is Angie. I am a researcher and master's student at Oregon State University in the environmental science program. And I'm going to make you fall in love with beavers. In the beginning, there was beaver. Giant species of Paleolithic beavers roamed North America during the Ice Age, averaging 6 feet long and weighing up to 200 pounds. The fossil record shows us that these giant castroides stood almost as tall as Justin Bieber and towered over the modern Castor canadensis, our American beaver. The fossilized skull shown here was recently discovered in the Yamhill River and tells us that for thousands of years, Oregon was beaver land. Prior to colonization, beaver populations across North America were estimated to be as high as 400 million individuals. Anywhere beaver could possibly be, they were. Beaver were so abundant in Oregon that they were immortalized in our state flag, our university mascots, and multitudes of place names. The naturalist Harry Radford, writing in the early 1900s, described beaver presence in the early American landscape like this. It is evident that every lake and pond was occupied, and every river, brook, and rill, from the largest to the most insignificant, was thickly peopled with these industrious and prolific animals. They seem to have completely possessed the land and to have been abundant almost beyond our present conception. And our valley was also home to many tribes that are referred to collectively as the Kalapuya people, whose ancestors are now part of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde. For thousands of years, they depended upon nutrient-rich beaver wetlands to grow crops like camas and wapato that thrived in seasonally flooded ecosystems. As beaver enriched the lowlands with water and collected dark, silty soils behind their dams, the Kalapuya peoples enriched the uplands with seasonal fire, returning nutrients to the soil and keeping savanna uplands open for acorn-bearing oak trees and fertile prairies full of wildflowers and native grasses. Scientific study, native people, and the valley plants themselves all tell us that beaver wetlands and cultural fire was what made these lands fertile and resilient. Plants like camas and Oregon ash have adapted to the presence of flooded soils and beaver chewing. They thrive and resprout when stimulated by beaver activity and floods. Similarly, wild prairies increase in vigor and diversity in response to low severity cultural fire. Sadly, trappers and settlers did not seek to understand the valley's ecological balance or the Kalapuya's cultural heritage. By the 1850s, Native people had been forcibly removed from their homelands, and millions of beaver had been slaughtered and their pelts shipped out to Danbury, Connecticut, the hat-making capital of the world. At its peak, Danbury was producing over 5 million hats per year. The most popular was the iconic beaver felted top hat. As a result, nationwide, beaver populations plummeted. It is thought that at their lowest numbers, there may have only been 100,000 left in the wild. Without beaver to maintain their dams and ponds, wetland complexes were compromised and never rebuilt. Settler activities and industrial efforts drained lakes and wetlands across the Willamette Valley. Receding waters exposed the rich silty loam or beaver soils that made farmers' crops so productive. Settlers quickly claimed these coveted soils for their fields, but the role beavers played in creating this fertility we benefit from has been largely forgotten. Today, the Willamette Valley has become a thriving agricultural area, but at what cost? Less than 10% of our native valley ecosystems remain, and an even smaller percentage of that are beaver wetlands. Connected watersheds, healthy floodplains, drought resistance, and biodiversity are all valued by organizations that are working to bring back our threatened and endangered species. And the good news is that is exactly what beaver have to offer. When beaver build dams throughout a watershed, they not only store water, they create wide bands of habitat that resist burning and wildfires. They create tiers of pools that absorb flood pulses and spread water throughout the wetland sponge. They prevent fast, violent water movement downstream and erosion. Beaver dams store sediment that settles behind their structures and creates habitat for a variety of plants, animals, and insects. So when we increase and restore beaver habitat, the effect ripples out throughout the entire watershed. Beaver are a keystone species. When they do well, so do the plants and animal populations around them, including us. Beaver have spent thousands of years learning to store water on the landscape to provide themselves with a consistent food source and protect themselves from predators. Beaver have survived everything from the Ice Age to life in the Sonoran Desert of Arizona to landscape-wide fires and the floods of the Willamette Valley. Because they adapted, so did the network of plants, pollinators, and birds that other animals have come to rely upon with beaver wetlands. If you can take home any message from this talk, it is that beavers build climate resilient habitats and beavers build biodiversity. So we need to look at what we are missing without our beaver wetlands and our connected floodplains. On the left, you can see what our modern streams and rivers suffer from, something called channelization, or a river that has scraped out so much of the riverbed, it has lost its ability to spread across the floodplain. Without woody debris and to slow the water and beaver dams to capture sediment and raise stream beds, high floods will continue to carve this type of river further and further down. The result is a dehydrated landscape and a river disconnected from its floodplain. In contrast, look at the healthy river system on the right. Not only are the soils healthy, rich, and saturated, they support a significant increase in vegetation and continue to gain fertility as silts wash down and accumulate to build soil and nutrients. The water moves slowly through the system, and pollutants and debris are captured and transformed into more habitat. This complexity helps to slow and sink water into the landscape. Equally important is the groundwater underneath a beaver wetland. Rivers and wetlands are not just above ground, they flow underground as well. The weight and pressure of surface water forces water to be filtered and cleaned as it passes through soils and gravels and enters the water table where it can be available for deep-rooting plants, freshwater wells, and refilling aquifers. So when we describe losing beaver habitat and losing our wetlands, it's not just surface water and habitat that we're losing, it's also groundwater storage capacity. Beavers can help our soils and wells stay resilient during drought. Beaver also do wonders for fish, especially salmon, who require varied flows and good water quality for spawning. Beaver dams create drops, flows, and temperature variations that support fish throughout their life stages and have demonstrated their importance as a refuge from increasingly hot summer temperatures. The pressure from beaver dams on groundwater also generates water exchange, and cooler temperatures occur when surface water to groundwater contact is made and exchanged in spaces underneath beaver dams. This helps to keep fish cool in the summer and provide them with important areas of refuge. So you can see why somebody who is interested in ecosystem restoration would take an interest in beavers. When you start to dig into the soil of this valley, the history, the native plants, the life cycle of salmon, the nesting requirements of birds, the pollinators needed by wildflowers, they all tie back to beavers. And so this is why I'm here. I had to know, why do beavers spend their lives engineering this complex habitat and altering ecosystems? And ultimately, it's for the same reasons that we do. We have a lot in common with beavers. Beavers want the same things we do: a stable place to raise a family, protection from danger, and an abundant source of reliable, nutritious food.
Angie, the audio's not coming through. I don't know if you want to
Oops,
try and fix it or not.
I'm just sitting there quietly. Yes, hang on, I know how to do it now. Sorry about that. Share computer sound. Okay. Well, so what I was showing you here is an example of why beaver need water. So see how agile they are when they're swimming and how effectively they can move mud and water and debris up onto the shore. That's the same strategy they use when they're making the dams. Oops. Let's see.
Beavers are a keystone species, and this simply means that beavers create habitat that is beneficial for so many other species. They also create habitat that is naturally fire and flood resistant.
So by damming water into these deep pools, this is how beavers keep themselves safe. When they're on land, they are slow and awkward. In water, they have the freedom to move, they can forage, and they can build without risking predation by animals like bears or coyotes or other wildlife. lodges and bank dens, like the one drawn above, act as fortresses that keep beaver dry and safe. Another thing you need to know about beavers is they are very family-oriented. They mate for life and live in family groups composed of the previous year's adolescents, the new kits of the year, and 2 doting beaver parents. Older kits stay home to help raise next year's babies, and beaver parents are very active, teaching their kits what to eat, how to build, and even how to sumo wrestle. So we are going to watch a clip from Holly Morocco. She is a wildlife researcher, and she runs one of the cutest beaver rehabilitation programs that exists. So these are both beavers that are about a year old, and they are in fact sumo wrestling for fun, and those little squeaks and humming noises are part of how they communicate and play with each other.
Hi, sweetie. Who's gonna win?
So when beaver have the right conditions, they turn narrow streams and side channels into connected wetlands and create an intricate network of dams and marshes that provide water and nutrient-rich soils for their favorite food plants. By engineering this series of connected habitats, they can support dispersing kits and those kits' future mates and grandchildren as they expand. They need a lot of room to wrestle. The wetlands that beaver make also supply them with a healthy and consistent crop of a diversity of plants. Beaver particularly love willows, dogwood, leafy greens, and the juicy inner bark of ash trees. And this fallen tree, or beaver felled tree, I should say, up there is actually at Ben's farm. So beyond their basic needs, I really need you to know that beaver are cute, as in really cute, as in they love sweet potatoes and they sing small, cute songs to themselves while they eat. Beavers are so cute that they are worth moving across the country and getting a master's degree for. Watching a beaver sing songs and eat sweet potatoes was a life-changing experience for me, and I hope it is for you too. So these rescue beavers are less than a year old, and they are still very dependent on their parents, or in this case, their human parent, to take care of them and show them what food is right to eat and how to be social. It never gets old. Also, this beaver is named Tulip. If you see that little ring she has on her back, that is all her doing. Beavers apparently like to decorate themselves, and we did not know this until Heidi Morocco started studying and documenting beaver habitat. They are incredibly intelligent, they're incredibly complicated, and there's so much we have to learn about them. So by this point, I think that you may be where I was a few years ago, at least I hope, which is willing to do anything to support these adorable creatures and advocate for the ecosystems that they create. You may be asking yourself what I asked years ago, which is, why don't I know more about beaver habitat? Why don't I know where they live, and why do I rarely see them? It is asking that question that led me to my research topic. So for my master's, I asked, where is the best beaver habitat in the Willamette Valley? And I also needed to ask myself, okay, but who is this research for? It's fun for me to know where the beaver are, but who can actually utilize this research? How can I use my graduate study as a 2-year active service to the larger restoration community? It was important to me that my time and effort contributed to the work restoration practitioners and land managers are doing. So through conversations with many of them, I realized how hard it is to define an ecosystem and restore it if you don't have a clear idea of what it looks like, or of what a healthy, intact one looks like. As it turns out, there are multiple PhDs worth of gaps in our current beaver knowledge. Then we need reference ecosystems of high quality beaver habitat for research and for restoration. But we don't even have a complete or comprehensive beaver survey for Oregon today. Additionally, beaver habitat has been so degraded in this valley that there have been very few studies or records on the structure of high quality beaver habitat. It's hard to find and there's not a lot left. So if you're a practitioner or a land manager or a farmer looking for a reference ecosystem, you need a healthy beaver wetland to examine. And that detailed habitat data is needed to describe the waterways, the plant species, the animal relationships, and the locations of habitat in the landscape that you want to replicate. So this is what I decided to study. I took the entire Willamette Valley on and have been diligently searching for beaver habitat and doing detailed surveys at each location to try and start to build this data set. What I've learned is wetland ecosystems are very nuanced and very dramatically from ecoregion to ecoregion and waterway to waterway. You can see a huge difference between these two habitats. This is an open marshland in the valley with shallow and ephemeral water. And behind where I'm standing when I took this photo, there is a large beaver lodge. And this is a very different environment. It has a very different plant community than this little bank lodge here. So this is also at Ben's farm. And you can see there's a little hole down at the bottom here. That is the entrance to a bank den that beaver have dug out underground and then up into the bank, so they're above the flood line. A lot of beaver here do not have good enough conditions to build dams or lodges, and they end up bank denning instead. So we need to know what are the most important parts of beaver habitat in the Willamette Valley ecosystem. And generally, we need to know what commonalities we see between sites and what lessons we can apply in many places. On a detailed level, we need to know what are the regional characteristics that we specifically see in our valley, and we need to know how are beaver using vegetation and waterways as habitat. So we have these basic consistent aspects that I see among all of my study regions. We have shallow slopes, we have willow or a strong community of edible plants, and we have pool formation that's possible behind a dam, which also means we need silty soil, and we need a steady supply of wood either falling into or washing down the waterway. So we need to know what the most important parts of beaver habitat are in the Willamette Valley ecoregion specifically. Generally, we need to know what commonalities we see in between sites and what we can apply in many places. Intimately, we need to know what are the regional characteristics and challenges we see specifically in our valley, and how are beaver utilizing vegetation and altered waterways. Something I'm seeing a lot of in our valley is this incision I talked about earlier. So see how This small stream is dropped far below the floodplain, and you can see the ridge up top here. And then we have of course, ubiquitous pile of blackberry growing behind in that area. These banks are steep and hard for beaver to climb. It doesn't give them good habitat access. But more positive things we're seeing is how beaver are coexisting with Oregon ash. So ash are incredibly resilient. They're made to resprout and they thrive from beaver pressure. So even though this ash here has been partially felled, it's still resprouting and is very alive and will continue to provide good habitat and forage for beavers. So to start this project, I first needed to know where the beavers are. We don't have a complete statewide beaver survey, though one is in the works with ODFW. So I was reliant on using remote sensing techniques to get a bird's eye view of the valley. I combined available stream and wetland maps with high resolution aerial imagery from Google Earth. And after countless hours, I started to get a sense of how to see the bright green of deciduous trees, the little dark spots of ponds and standing water and wetlands, and also what larger landscape features were likely to have beaver. Here you can see two examples. So this is a high quality beaver habitat here. This is Ben's farm. So it's on the coast fork of the Willamette, and Bear Creek runs right through here. And what I was able to key in on were these series of little ponds along Bear Creek as it connects with the coast fork of the Willamette River. So beaver really need connected habitat, and places like this are critical for them to be able to have stable populations. If this creek was isolated from the river, or if this area was compromised and did not have good vegetation cover, it wouldn't be good habitat for them. They need long stretches because of how they reproduce. Like when the kits leave their lodge, they really like to stay close to their family groups. So for them to expand, they need to have multiple waterways to go upstream and downstream so they can maintain those family relationships and trust with other neighborhood beavers. If beaver go outside of their territory, sometimes they run into problems with other beavers and they can fight each other or prevent them from having babies, and it can be a real problem for their survival. Being able to slowly network outward is really important for beaver. So when I am looking for these key elements of beaver habitat, I need to take that satellite data, develop a point set, and then go out and ground truth it. So this is me ground truthing. I am proud to say that I have had a surprisingly high success rate. I've lost track of how many casual site visits I've been on at this point in the early stages, but it's in the 30s, and I have only been disappointed once. I was able to identify 20 good study sites, and that is what I'm using for my formal survey, but I've seen a lot. So when I go into the field, I put on my beaver goggles, and we're all going to put on our beaver goggles right now. It's very important. So we need to start thinking like a beaver. Think proximity to water, good places to hide, and a good population of food plants. So here on the left, we can see part of Bear Creek here. It's a great little creek, and is also similar to having a slough or a side channel as far as it providing beaver with excellent habitat that's connected to a larger body of water. You can see evidence of what is called a beaver slide here, where the mud is worn down and there's a clear path going straight into the channel. That's something I look for. And you can also see evidence of freshly chewed and debarked sticks and trees here. So obviously the cut tree has been freshly debarked. But below are one of the most important things I see, which is little teeny willow sticks or dogwood sticks. And beaver like to hang out in these cozy little like understory cavities that they carve out. And you will often see little piles of fresh sticks in some of their favorite places. Another thing I look for is wide open ponds near rivers or creeks and slow moving sloughs or oxbows. Sloughs are not often considered great habitat here, but I have found them to be critical for beaver. Every single slough that I have visited has had a healthy beaver population. Key features that I look for when I arrive at a site like that are beaver dams. So you can see this is a small dam here that is where a stream feeds into a larger pond. I look for scent mounds. So on the left, this is a big pile of leaves and mud that beaver have pushed up. And sort of like male cats, they spray with castoreum, this special musky gland or musky scent that they carry in castor glands. And that helps them mark their territory and tell other beavers that they're here. And I also look for, of course, the iconic stick lodges. I see much less of these because they require such a wide riparian corridor for them to feel safe and protected, and also to have enough material to make one. But if you see something like that, you were really lucky. It's a dead giveaway that you have a good beaver population. I also am trying to understand the long-term presence of beaver in a site, not just that they are there and passing through, but that they've been there for a long time. So there are amazing things I'm calling legacy chews, which is where beaver have gnawed specifically ash, but occasionally cottonwood trees. And they have healed over, and beaver have come back and gnawed them again. So we're talking, these trees have seen multiple generations of use by beaver. And there are some where you can see the bark is a couple inches thick and there's still an opening where the tree hasn't fully healed, and you can see little beaver tooth marks in the bark. So that tells me that when we're thinking about restoration, we really need to think about planting and fencing for succession so beaver have a chance to utilize these trees in this way without cutting them down. They're able to just eat the cambium, the like rich, juicy part underneath the outer bark, and that provides them with what I think is a really essential nutrient during the winter. It's one of the biggest predictors of healthy, happy beaver populations that I found throughout all my study sites. So the more I've done this work, the more patterns have emerged, and I've learned a lot about the valley. I've also realized the important role that landowners, especially farmers, play in beaver restoration. Our valley is 96% privately owned land, which makes cooperative habitat management strategy difficult on a large scale. So one of the best things you can do for beaver is give them as much connected habitat as you can. Neighbors and watershed councils make the difference. If you can connect with other people who have adjoining properties and habitat, or connect with your local watershed councils and try and target restoration in areas where there is more habitat up or downstream, you're going to have a much more successful population of beavers because they're able to disperse and maintain those family groups. So these photos here are from Rice Farms, which is a property recently owned by the Soil Water Conservation District in Springfield. They have an incredible property that connects both to the McKenzie River and to the slough that is further connected upstream to a large pond that their neighbor owns, and beyond that to a eWeb property. So this is a really great example of how three neighbors with hundreds of acres in a row can provide really excellent beaver habitat. Another thing that landowners can do is replant beaver-centric trees and shrubs. My work has involved studying the most important species for beaver, primarily the plants that they rely on during winter and drought. So I did a winter vegetation study and inventoried all the vegetation I saw, and especially the vegetation that was being utilized by beaver when other forage sources like clover and forbs are not available. So these species, the dogwoods, willows, alder, cottonwoods, and especially Oregon ash, are critical to beaver having stable supplies of food throughout the winter. Another important thing landowners can do is give beeves space. Fencing livestock out of waterways is essential for protecting these fragile ecosystems. Intact banks and intact vegetation near banks is important for beaver who need to use waterways to stay safe. When streams become incised or bank dens are crushed in by livestock walking on top of it, it makes it harder and harder for beaver to have the essentials that they need to survive. So the number one thing that people can do for beaver, whether you're a landowner or not, is to embrace the mess. So put on your beaver goggles and see not this messy, complicated fire problem sort of habitat, but in fact, a resilient, biodiverse ecosystem that is essential for beaver. So if you look at this photo on the bottom, you can see that this is actually a beaver dam. So these beeves are in such a small habitat corridor that they have had to make a small little hidden dam underneath the willows and ash trees to start the process of ponding and rebuilding their habitat. This area was really special, and it was unfortunately one of my sites that was mowed down because people in the surrounding area thought that it looked messy and it was too close to their homes, and they thought that it was a wildfire risk. So it's really important for all of us, landowners or not, to advocate on behalf of these spaces. The things that look messy to us provide critical refuge for beaver. In areas where they only have very small ponds and river corridors, being able to crawl into a thicket of roses and even blackberry is essential for them to survive.
And we've just got a couple minutes left, so I just want to give you a heads up. We've got to wrap up quick.
Okay, almost done. So, and just on that note, here's another example where beaver who don't eat blackberry, these beaver are eating blackberry and they are tunneling through a blackberry hedge. So even areas that seem like they could be a restoration problem in some circumstances can be really important for beaver survival. The best thing you can do is let them be.
Excellent beaver habitat. We've got a slow-moving slough. We have sloping banks that are good to hide in and also eat sticks on. We've got fresh sticks here in this nice little side channel formed by this fallen ash tree. We have diversity of accessible bank vegetation and cover that gives beaver a safe space to forage. We have a natural dam occurring across the stream with some of these fallen ash trees. And we have this excellent bank den that's created by beaver tunneling underneath and utilizing this incredible bundle of ash roots that leads up to this beaver trail that heads off into the forest that way.
So the take-home message is that this beaver habitat is for you too. The spaces that beaver create are beautiful and wild, and as I showed in the video, they're very peaceful. Thank you for embracing beaver and listening to my favorite thing in the whole world.
Thank you, Angie. We are at time, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen one last time with an evaluation link. We would love for people to take the evaluation. I'll also send it via email. And then if you have a minute to stay on late, please take Angie's poll. I want to see what you learned. But thank you so much. I definitely learned some new things about beavers, even though I've helped put together a resource on them. There's so much more that I don't know. So thank you for sharing all of your knowledge and your research.
Every day.
And if anyone is available to stay later and has some questions for any of our speakers, please go ahead and put those in the chat. And then if you don't have time to jump on our evaluation now, we'll send that link out as well. All right, Angie, do you want to go ahead and share answers to the questions real quick?
Sure. The killer doing great. Okay, so I talked about putting on your beaver goggles to see key features that indicate good beaver habitat. So what are features that you could see that indicate where beaver habitat exists or could be improved? We have evidence of fresh or historic chewing on large ash or cottonwood trees. We have clusters of dogwood or willows, especially with sprouts clipped at the base. We have a slough or side channel near a larger body of water, and freshly chewed or debarked sticks or tree branches near water. The other option is a tiny table near a stream with beaver-sized cups and plates. You only see that in Narnia, not in the Willamette. So our second question, what are ways you can attract beavers to your land and set them up for success? One option, dig a pond in a wet area of your field and plant a few willow trees for food. No, that is not an effective way to help beaver. They need connectivity. You can fence livestock out of waterways and give streams and banks a 100-foot wide buffer on either side. Yes, they need wide riparian habitat for forage and safety. Can you push your farm/pile into an irrigation ditch so it looks like a beaver lodge and then put a welcome mat out front? No, that is not an effective way to welcome beaver. They need to build their own structures. Other things you can do that are positive. You can talk with your upstream and downstream neighbors about the benefits of beaver and work together to reconnect habitat. You can plant shrubs and trees that beavers need and plan to fence or protect them until they are fully mature. You can embrace the complexity and the mess, leave down trees, messy thickets, and piles of driftwood alone, especially near waterways. And leaving little piles of sweet potatoes next to a pond on your property. The beaver would love that, but importing food is not a good management style for beaver, even though they would delight in it. Thank you for participating. I'm so glad you learned about beavers.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you to all our speakers. And thanks everyone for joining today. We're over time, so I will let everyone go, but I'll share the recording and the evaluation link soon. Thanks again for attending.